So I'm recording this now. So my name is Kevin Oldenburg. I am the apiary manager at the West Plains Beekeepers Association Club. Um, I've been taking care of the club apiary for about 3 years since we started it. We've got, in theory, we have 8 hives in the apiary. That's how many we started with in the fall. I have 2 here at my house, and there's 6 at our apiary. One of my hives here at the house is definitely dead. The other one is still looking really good, so that one will make the winter. Um, I checked the club apiary. I think 5 of the 6 at the club apiary are still alive. So we'll find out in about another month or so how those are doing. Um, so I'm not only am I the apiary manager at the club, I'm also the president of the Washington State Beekeepers Association. All you guys will be members of the association. You get with your class, I believe you get a 1-year free membership in the Washington State
Yep.
Association. And today I've got a couple talks that I was asked to give to you. The first is about basically managing a hive, and the second is swarms. Um, the big thing I want to try and get across is that, part of the reason we do this beginning class is to give you the information you need to keep bees. Um, and because what we found was that, probably 90% of people who want to keep bees, they invest a lot of time and energy in that first year, and it's an expensive hobby. And then they give it up after the first year. So what we want to try and do is give you the information so you can make a really good decision on whether or not you even want to keep bees before you invest I'm going to say it's probably going to cost you $700-800 minimum to get into the hobby, right? You're going to need 2 hives. You're going to need, all your gear, things like that. Not to mention the time and energy to get into it. So, my recommendation for all of you is if you're not keeping bees currently, to see if you like it, come out to the apiary when we're out there and work the hives at the apiary. Then you can see what's going on, and you're not killing your own bees. You're killing the club bees. And we do lots of fun stuff out there. So we collect swarms, we catch swarms, we put them in the apiary. We split hives. Any hive that's overwintered, we're going to split at least once and probably twice to keep them from swarming. We'll talk about that in a bit. But anyway, you're all invited to come out. Also, we'll be doing package day on April 17th. So if you guys decide that you're going to do your own bees, what we do is we have a couple packages for the club apiary that we will package there. So you come out to the apiary first to see how it's done. So you don't have to do it kind of blind. You'll come out. You're invited to come out. You don't have to. Come out. We'll show you how to package those hives, and then for the next month after that, we'll show you what the hives should be looking like as they progress through the first month or so. And then typically the club will sell those hives to anybody who wants them, because we have more bees and typically we know what to do with. So anyway, I am going to start sharing my screen, and share screen, and let's see, chapter managing the hive. Okay. So now hopefully everybody can see this. Let's see. Is that going to let me do it? Does everybody see that? Give me a thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so, what I want you to do is not do what I did my first year, or actually it was more like I've been keeping bees now for about 8 or 9 years, and I don't like honey. So I don't really care if my bees make honey at all because I don't like it. What I really like to do though was I became fascinated with the bees themselves. My wife decided many years ago that she was going to keep bees. This was probably almost, must be 25 years ago. She took a class when we lived out on the East Coast, and then we had kids and she never kept bees, and then we moved out here, and then she decided that the whole family was going to learn how to keep bees. We all kind of went kicking and screaming. The kids decided not to keep bees, but I just became fascinated with watching them. So the first couple of years I had bees, I killed my hives every year. And what I did was, I'd get a package of bees, and then every 2 or 3 days, I'd open the hive and take all the frames out and look at them and see what the bees were doing. And I can tell you from experience, it's a really bad thing. You don't want to do that, because it's like somebody, pulling the roof off your house, going in, rearranging all your furniture, moving all the stuff in your kitchen around, and then putting it back together and expecting you to do well. What you really want to do with your hive in terms of monitoring your hive is don't mess with it. The really thing, there's only a couple things you want to do to monitor your hive. One is you want to put eye bolts in the bottom side of the hive and weigh it. You can tell almost everything you need to know about the hive by simply measuring the weight, recording the weight, basically from the spring, all the way through the fall when you're going to harvest your honey. So you can tell almost everything you need to know there. There's a few reasons you're going to want to get inside your hive, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the first thing you do when you walk up to your hive is you want to observe it. And it's funny because, like I told you, we had 2 hives here for the club apiary. One was a package that we bought last year for the club, and that package died, which you could tell by watching that hive from the outside of that hive. It was just a shitty hive all summer long. It wasn't real active. The queen was never laying all that well. It just was not a strong hive ever. And that's one thing I have against buying a package. In my experience, package bees are junk. The way they're produced, the queens typically are coming out of Hawaii. And you get those Hawaiian queens that are used to a nice subtropical climate. You move them up here to the Pacific Northwest where it's cooler and drier. They just don't do well. The genetics are not there. So while we do buy packages for demonstration, I typically don't recommend them for use. They're just not that good of a bee. And the other thing is, so the other hive that I have was a swarm that we caught the end of July. And there's a saying in beekeeping, swarm in May is worth a ton of hay. A swarm in June is worth a silver spoon. A swarm in July isn't worth a fly. But we caught this swarm the end of July. It was a huge swarm, and we put it in the hive. And the hive that we put it in already had comb in it and a little bit of honey, so they had a really good head start, right? Because they didn't have to draw their own comb. But that hive, those bees in that hive, they are the pissiest bees that I think we've ever had. My wife has been stung, and she's been 100 feet from the hive, and they're just an aggressive, very aggressive bee. But man, are they strong! I mean, that hive from the end of July, it produced. It went quickly from nothing to well over 100 pounds. It grew incredibly fast. The queen is prolific. They're just an aggressive bee. So anyway, so that hive is looking really good over the winter, and it just, you can see the bees, especially now. They're still, any day that's a little bit warm, they come and go. So they're coming out and relieving themselves. So the first thing you want to do when you're quote monitoring the hive is to go out and just sit in the front of the hive. Watch the hive. Are the bees coming and going? Do they look strong and healthy? Are like in this picture? Obviously, there's a pollen that they're collecting. Remember, the pollen is bee bread. It's the protein source for the bee. So if they're coming and pulling pollen, that means that the queen is probably laying quite well, because they need the pollen as protein to feed the larva. Just see how active they are. Now, obviously, they're going to be more active on warm days, less active on cooler or rainy days. But yeah, just watch your hive and see how active it is. A lot of times you'll be able to tell that a hive is in decline if you see not too many bees coming or going, or if you're seeing yellow jackets or wasps starting to enter the hive. There should be guard bees there that are protecting that hive and keeping these other predatory bees out. So a few years ago, I think in our club, we probably lost 70% of our hives to wasps and hornets. It was a terrible wasp and hornet year. and they just will simply overwhelm a hive and destroy it. So when the hive reaches about, well, when the outside temperature reaches at least 60 degrees, preferably a little warmer, what you can do is you can start taking your hive apart and looking at it. You're going to want to do this a couple times, at least a couple times a year, maybe more, but I don't do it too often. Like I said, I tend to leave the hive now to basically be by itself. And when I open my hive now, it's for a specific purpose. And typically I do it a couple times. One is really the main reason I open it is to start moving frames around and create that honey block that I talked about before. I like to move all of my brood down to the lower hive body, and I move my honey up. So I keep doing that to create that honey block. So I might have to do that a couple times. And then I might open the hive again, just very briefly to see how the bees are doing. So if you see this picture here, this is a hive or a frame that's just starting to be drawn with comb. You can see the big white area here and another one here. This is obviously an empty frame, and the bees are just starting to draw comb here. And then you can see this picture, the smaller picture here on the right. This is a picture inside the cell, and you can see these little, they look almost like little grains of rice. Those are the eggs. So this is a good laying pattern. You can see most of these are full of eggs. Margo, would you get me a glass of water, please? And then here's the brood pattern in this frame down here. Okay, so all you're looking at is, I'm looking for really a couple things when I look inside my hive. I'm looking, I'm not looking for my queen. I don't think I've seen, except maybe by accident, I probably haven't seen a queen in 5 years at least. I don't even look for her. All I'm looking for is, can I find a frame that has eggs? If there's lots of eggs and lots of brood, I know the queen is fine. I don't need to find her. There's really no reason. And typically she's going to run and hide anyway. She doesn't like sunlight, so it's really typically pretty hard to find the queen anyway. So I don't even look for her. What I'm looking for in my hive is brood like this, and fresh laid eggs. Because if you find eggs and larvae, the queen is fine. So here's what these both show a couple really good pictures of what a brood frame should look like. What you're going to see is brood fairly solid in the middle, okay? And then around the edges, you're going to see basically stored honey, capped honey, and then typically pollen along the edges, okay? Now remember, so what they're doing is, before this is capped, all the larvae in there need to eat. So the worker bees, the nurse bees, are coming in, they're taking the honey out of here and some of the pollen, and they're using that to feed the larvae that are in the frame. And if you notice that there's lots of little holes in here, okay, these holes, at least it's theorized that the reason there are holes in here is to create ventilation, to help keep the brood cool. So, it could be that the queen just, didn't lay eggs in there, but they think there's a reason for it, and that is it needs to have some areas to get air movement in there to keep the brood cooler. So this is what you should see, okay? If you start seeing a pattern that's really sporadic, where, there might be brood up here and brood down here and brood over here, and it's not a nice tight pattern like this, that typically means that your queen is failing. Now, if your queen is failing, what do? There's a couple things you can do. A lot of commercial guys will go in and they simply replace their queens every so often. I don't advocate that. I think the bees know what they're doing, and so if the queen starts to fail, they will replace her themselves. They will see that the queen is not as strong as she should be, and they will replace her. So I typically let the bees do what the bees want to do. And the thing is, if they replace their own queen, you at least have a better shot of having better genetics instead of replacing her with a queen out of Hawaii. So I typically let the bees do what they want to do. So like I said, if that queen is failing, what you're going to see is you're going to see supersedure cells. And these are supersedure cells. They kind of look like a little peanut, and they're typically hanging from the middle of the frame, somewhere up in the middle of the frame, okay? And you can see anywhere from 1, 2 of these to, maybe 9 or 10, and there might be multiples on different frames in your hive. Now, this is a reason that you typically don't want to open your hives too often, because if you do have these supersedure cells, you can damage them because they're hanging out from the side of the frame. And if you damage them, you can damage the queen that's in there. Now, if the queen is really strong, the queen that's in there laying, and the workers try to make supersedure cells, she will bull her way in there and sting these new queens to death and kill them before they hatch. But the workers are going to try and keep her away from that if they want to supersede her. They're going to wait until they're going to keep her away until these queens hatch. These new queens will be strong. Typically, the first one that hatches will go around and sting the other ones and kill them. And then she and the old queen will duke it out to see who's the survivor. So I like to let them do what they're going to do. The danger with that is the two queens, when they fight, they could end up killing each other, and then you're a queenless hive. But there's ways to resolve that as well, which we can talk about. Actually, I might as well tell you now. What you do is, that's why it's always recommended that you have 2 hives. And I saw that was a question earlier in the chat line. Is 1 hive okay? Well, yes, 1 hive is okay, but I would never recommend having less than 2, for the simple reason that if you ever have a hive that is failing, you can simply take a frame of eggs from a strong hive and put it into a weak hive. And if that hive happens to be queenless, the worker bees in that new hive will take one of those eggs, or several of those eggs, and make new queens themselves. So you can basically strengthen another hive, a weak hive, with a strong hive. And I've done this on several occasions as well, where a hive just, like, for example, we may catch a swarm and the swarm is small, and I have a hive that's just going gangbusters. I'll go into that really strong hive and I'll pull, 2 or 3 or 4 frames of brood, capped brood or eggs, and put it in with the weak hive, and that just gives it a big boost of additional worker bees, once they hatch. So that's why it's recommended to have 2 hives instead of just 1, because you can use 1 hive to help strengthen another hive. Now, the other thing you're going to see are these same types of cells, these little peanuts hanging down from the bottom of a frame. Now, typically those are swarm cells. Now, we'll talk about swarming a little bit later, so I'm not going to get into it now. But again, this is another reason why you want to be careful when you're opening and closing your hives. So I don't recommend doing that very often. So when do you want to add more space to a hive? Well, the rule of thumb is when your top hive body is 3/4 full, okay? I don't use a top bar hive, but again, it's the same with a top bar hive. About 3/4 of the top bars are full. So typically what I'll do is, I keep weighing my hive. When my hive gets to, I'll have typically, a hive that's overwintered. It'll be fairly light in the spring. It'll be down in the 40-pound range, maybe 50 pounds. When it hits 70, 75 pounds, I know that it's about time for me to go in there and look. I'll open the hive. I'll start switching my frames around to put all the brood, because typically in the winter, the queen is going to move up to the second hive body, and she'll have laid a whole bunch of eggs and stuff up there in the spring. And so I typically move that second hive body down to the bottom. I move the bottom hive body to the top. That's the first thing I do in the spring. And then as the weight gets higher, I'll open that hive and check the second hive body. And if I start seeing brood and stuff up there, I'll simply take that, move it down to the lower hive body, and move the honey up to the top. And I do that a couple times during the year. Our honey flow is typically in, June-ish. And so you're going to see the weight really start to take off there. And you'll probably want to do it at least once there. You don't want to mess with them during the honey flow, because that'll really, really cut down on the amount of the honey that they're making. Anyway, I just do that a few times. But when your hive body is about 3/4 full, in fact, if you're starting with a package, you're only going to have one hive body. You will, put your package in there, and then weigh your hive. When that hive gets to, probably on the order of 25 pounds or so, you're going to want to check it out. Maybe 30 pounds. Check it out. If it's 3/4 full of bees, the frames. So that is if about 7 of the 10 frames are full of bees and brood and honey, you're going to want to add a second hive body on top of that so they have additional room to grow into. Oh, was that it for the presentation? I guess that's it. So anyway, so that's all you need to do when you're monitoring your hive. Monitoring your hive is really quite simple. Basically because you don't really want to do a whole lot to it, okay? Somebody will talk to you about diseases and things like that. We really haven't seen, knock on wood, much in the line of diseases other than varroa mite. And we've been much more successful recently treating for varroa, just prophylactically. So I typically treat my hives 4 times a year for varroa, and we've been keeping varroa mite down fairly well. The other thing you should know is it's not unusual. The average beekeeper now is losing about 30% of their hives every year. And I don't think that's, I hear anecdotally that it used to be that people never lost hives, but that doesn't make any sense to me, because if people never lost a hive, 50 years ago, we would now be, way past our ears in beehives. So hives have to die off at some rate. So I think it's pretty common. Maybe historically it was more in the 20% range, but you're going to lose about 30% of your hives every year, no matter how good a beekeeper you are. I think I went 3 years without losing a hive, and I was patting myself on the back saying, hey, I've got this down. No, I'm not going to lose any hives. And I lost 6 the next year, lost every hive the next year. So it averages itself out. I have no clue what was different. Why did I lose those 6 hives? No clue. So be prepared for that, which is why I said it's an expensive hobby. It's also nice to have 2 hives because, right, if you lose one of them, you got your other hive. Every hive that overwinters, you're going to have to split. Okay, because if you don't split it, it's going to swarm, which we'll talk about next. So that said, are there any questions about how to monitor a hive? You'll have to go off mute if you want to ask your questions.
Sherry, are you there?
I am here. Nobody has asked a question currently. Did your previous questions earlier get answered, everybody? We did 1 or 2 packages, hives. So yeah, that looks good.
And like I said, so I think what you should do is, obviously we'll do the package day. You can come out and watch us. In fact, what happens on package day is I typically show everybody the first package, and I'll show everybody how to do the first package. We always buy 2. And then, I always ask for a volunteer, whoever wants to do the second package, just to practice it before you do your own. And I really don't care, you can't really, you can mess it up. I guess you can lose your queen, but, since we have a bunch of other hives in the apiary, I can always make another one. That's not a big deal. There's a question here, a question about weighing hives. Is the weight with the box included? Yes. So basically you're weighing everything, all the frames and the outer box and, everything together, top cover, bottom screen, bottom board, everything. That's when people say, oh, your hive has to be, you want a hive that's 110 pounds going into winter, because then your bees will live. Well, I've had hives as low as 70 pounds survive just fine in the winter, and I've had a hive over 110 pounds die. So, I think it's more viral load and things like that dictate more than food. So anyway, any other questions before I move on? Okay.